Pittsburgh always seems to show up when I analyze the cities where you get the most urbanism bang for your buck. But it is important to ground truth things, so I decided to go to the Burgh and speedrun all the neighborhoods I could to see if the numbers are telling the truth. And today you're going to find out because I'm going to count down 10 neighborhoods that give you an almost absurd amount of value for your housing dollar. There are some other characteristics that make Pittsburgh unique too, and I'll touch on some of those as well. But right off the bat, I want to set the context by talking about the city's transit system. If you didn't know, Pittsburgh does have a subway. The city's light rail line, the T, runs deep underground through downtown in rail tunnels that date back to the 1860s and were repurposed as part of the city's light rail system in the 1980s. It's not a grade-separated system. Outside of downtown, the lines run at grade on old streetcar alignments, and the regional coverage is pretty limited. So for transit, you're most likely going to rely on buses. And there is some excellent bus service in Pittsburgh, which I'll talk about in a minute, but service is going to vary a lot depending on where you are. For me, I stayed in Southside Flats, a great neighborhood I'll talk more about later, but not super central, so I ended up taking several trips on the Route 48 bus that connects to downtown. But 30-minute headways, on weekdays even, on what seems like a pretty important route. So one thing I became aware of pretty quickly is that not only Pittsburgh, but the entire state of Pennsylvania is deep in a transit funding crisis that's about to get much worse if the legislature doesn't pass a new budget that addresses it. So if you live anywhere in Pennsylvania, there's a campaign called Transit for All PA that's done some great organization around helping Governor Shapiro get his budget proposal passed. Transit for All PA makes it as easy as possible to contact your state legislators. The State House has passed the transit funding packages multiple times, so it's really the state Senate holding things up. So if you live in a district with a Republican senator, or if you know people in those districts, your voice is even more important. But regardless of where you live in Pennsylvania, you should call or write ASAP, because I believe we're looking at a June 30th deadline. Anyway, links down the description. Okay, I don't want to leave you with the impression that transit in Pittsburgh is a slow-moving disaster, because depending on where you live, the city has some of the slickest bus service in the United States. This is Penn Station, the downtown terminus of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. busway, which runs out to the east through several of the neighborhoods I'm going to talk about later in the video. The busway follows what I believe is an old Pennsylvania Railroad main line, so there's lots of right-of-way, and there's even a dormant light rail station here, which hasn't seen regular service for over a decade. I'm not sure what the long-term plan is here. So the main line was once quad-tracked. It's a super valuable, wide piece of right-of-way. This is a city where flat terrain is very hard to come by. The line is now double-tracked, and in 1980, the Port Authority bought the surplus right-of-way from Conrail, which owned the alignment at that point. The busway serves several routes that branch out to different termini on the east end. So if you live in one of the inner neighborhoods along the core of the alignment, you're gonna get pretty incredible service. So the downtown terminus of the busway is a bit confusing. It's called Penn Station, but it's right at the base of the old Union Station. There's a reasonable explanation for this discrepancy that I'm not gonna bore you with. Just Google it. It isn't actually a train station anymore. It's been converted into Pittsburgh's premier apartment residence. I tried to sneak in and take some photos of the bonkers interior of this place, but security wasn't really having it. Right next door, and equally charming, the actual Pittsburgh Amtrak station. I wanted to explore the opulent interior of this one as well, but apparently I came at the wrong time because station operating hours are 6 p.m. to 7:45 a.m., which might seem ridiculous until you consider that the station hosts one Floridian in each direction and one Pennsylvanian in each direction daily, and all of the trains come basically in the dead of night. Okay, it is actually ridiculous. Pittsburgh should be the transportation crossroads that connects the Midwest and the Great Lakes to the eastern seaboard. Well, actually, it was exactly that, back when we were a proper country. And Pittsburgh didn't have just one jewel of a train station. This is the old Pittsburgh and Lake Erie station on the south side of the Monongahela, across from downtown. It served B&O and New York Central lines. It's also spectacular, and also not a train station anymore. I believe a lot of it has been converted to office, and the ground floor is occupied by a massive weekend brunch spot. Pro tip, just sneak in, spend a couple minutes basking in the bygone splendor. And to be clear, this channel does not endorse lifting a few scones from the buffet on your way out. The Pittsburgh and Lake Erie station is the anchor of the larger Station Square redevelopment. Lots of nods to the city's legacy as a transportation hub, and a decent amount of new density, pretty close into downtown, walking and biking distance in my opinion, and there is a pretty good amount of both in this location, but also a T station right nearby too, so this is a solid spot. You know, usually when I go to a city, I stay downtown and make sure to spend a lot of the time filming there. And I'll probably have to come back and explore on a different trip, but for this time, I mostly just traveled through on my way out to various neighborhoods because those were the places I was most interested in exploring. So, neighborhoods. I am going to present this as a top 10 list. It's not super scientific. I will share some data on things like walk score and housing costs as we go through, but part of this was I wanted to get a more qualitative impression of these places and just vibe some vibes. Let's start with an honorable mention so you see how this plays out. Polish Hill, one of the neighborhoods adjacent to the East Busway. What I'm going to do is choose a location in each neighborhood that I think is really emblematic of what the neighborhood is all about. Keep in mind, this is coming from someone who only had 2 full days in the city. I didn't by any means get to every neighborhood in Pittsburgh. I really focused on ones that come up in the affordable urbanism analysis I do. If you're a local, these might not be the locations you associate with each neighborhood. This is just one outsider's impression. Anyway, for Polish Hill, I'm going with Gooskies, and the locals are probably going to be annoyed if a bunch of pinhead urbanists start showing up at their local, so resist. Walk score rating of 70, and everything I'm about to show you is much better, but Polish Hill has a ton of character, and the prevailing home prices are pretty crazy. Okay, here's my actual top 10. Allentown, way up the hill on the south side. It's the rare American streetcar suburb that still has a streetcar. Location? Let's try this Italian restaurant across from the streetcar mural. Walk score rating 80, so we're in the very walkable category. Seems accurate. And let's check the prevailing housing prices for zip code 15210, and yeah. 9. The Strip District, east of downtown, along the Allegheny. There are a lot of pluses here, tons of cool old buildings. Also, newer residential, beware the dreaded luxury condos. Is there a big adaptive reuse development with a food hall? I'm surprised you even asked. Kinda cool though, I'm pretty happy anytime rail-related infrastructure gets preserved. There is some strange stuff going on here though. All kinds of shops selling what I just don't believe is authorized Steelers and Pirates merch. Lots of trappings of an up-and-coming neighborhood, and for our walk score location, let's go with this bike store because for whatever reason, the Strip District doesn't rate an 80 for walking, but the bike score is strong and I did see a lot of biking out here. Shares a zip code with downtown, so housing shows up a bit pricier than just about everything else we're going to look at, but you do get a dog pub, so there's that. Next up, let's go to Mount Washington, a very quaint little neighborhood on the south side of the Monongahela, across from downtown. If you haven't realized this about Pittsburgh already, the topography is absolutely wild. It makes transportation a challenge, which I'll talk more about later, but also you get these insane views in a lot of the neighborhoods. And I want to say Mount Washington feels a bit remote and isolated, but it's also home to the upper station of the Monongahela Incline, one of Pittsburgh's remaining funiculars, and the lower station is right at Station Square, so you're actually pretty well connected. Yes, this is very old technology, but still extremely useful and very awesome. And while you're waiting for the car to arrive, you can learn that Pittsburgh once had 19 different inclines. Only 2 survive today, and this one is a serious amenity for Mount Washington. Let's check out the walk score at Gordo's. Pretty strong, scores well on transit, and the prevailing home price in 15211 seems almost impossible for what you're getting. 7, Shady Side on the south side of the MLK busway, and this one is honestly fantastic. One thing about Pittsburgh's inner neighborhoods, you don't see that much residential density, which might change if I can convince enough people to move here and drive up demand. Now I'm just asking for trouble. So Shady Side is not cheap by Pittsburgh standards. Prevailing home price in the zip code is verging on $500,000, but you do get an athleisure store and a quality consumer electronics retailer here on Walnut Street. And let's paste the street address of said quality consumer electronics retailer into the walk score machine and see what pops out. Really, really strong for walking and biking, and you're very close to the East Busway. 6, Squirrel Hill. So one thing I realized about Pittsburgh while I was here, I'm used to having to account for a lot of travel time to get between neighborhoods in most US cities I go to, but in Pittsburgh, so many of the great neighborhoods are so close together. Like Shady Side, the zip code here is pricey if you're buying, but also check out the apartment rents because those things don't always correlate. This is a killer neighborhood with a couple great high streets, and checking the metrics on the Squirrel Hill Cafe, walker's paradise. Also great for biking, and you're right next door to Shenley Park, which really is Pittsburgh's crown jewel city park, kind of an urban oasis. Okay, now let's go north over, well, pick your bridge, and this is the East Allegheny neighborhood. One thing I noticed is that just about any location that isn't literally downtown or in the Squirrel Hill Shady Side area is gonna have a pretty reasonable prevailing home value, and East Allegheny definitely fits that category. They were having a little pop-up market at this pub. It was kind of a vibe. I hung out for a bit, and if we plug in that street address, the scores are really strong across the board, and I think it's pretty accurate. Number 4, I have to give you a neighborhood that's basically right on the busway, and it's East Liberty. There's actually a bunch of TOD around East Liberty Station. Like, this dog grooming / bakery place is practically right on top of it. And if we plug in the street address, the results are pretty bonkers, which rings true. The only thing that seems off is the transit score. I guess it depends where you're going, but you're gonna get all kinds of service at the busway station. And for my viewers in the Friendship neighborhood, I apologize because I'm lumping you in at number 4 because it's the same zip code and I don't want to try to get more granular than that. And the prevailing home price in 15206 is crazy for what you get. And if I plug in the address for the neighborhood Yin's coffee outlet, and please don't make me explain the etymology of Yin's, but the results are just very, very good. Okay, top 3 neighborhoods still to come, and this is a Pittsburgh video, and I haven't even really talked about bridges yet. Pretty crazy. Usual ways to connect with the channel, and special thanks to the folks at the Transportation Club at Carnegie Mellon who kind of figured out how to get me out there. They did it as part of a whole weekend of urbanism advocacy that I think was massively successful. I think we had like 400 people at my in-person event. Pittsburgh really turned out, and it was a lot of fun. So one thing I always think about a lot when I visit a city that was built around blue-collar industry, and I definitely thought about this in Detroit, but also Winston-Salem and Durham, is what does it mean to have a blue-collar ethos in a country where we just don't make stuff anymore? Because I think those personality traits are still at play in Pittsburgh in a big way. And I thought about it a lot in terms of the city's geography, which is really tough. A lot of the terrain isn't easy, which is evidenced not just by the inclines, but by the number of tunnels there are right in the middle of the city, and also by the fact that it seems to be the pound-for-pound capital of public stairways. Then, on top of all of this, Pittsburgh is sort of the ultimate river city. I said this in a different video, but pound for pound, it really is amazing if you're a bridge enthusiast, and who isn't? This gets back to the idea I mentioned earlier when we were looking at the Monongahela Incline. The topography and the geographic setting of this city make transportation a challenge, but those same things also make the city just extremely photogenic. Also, is there any city that has such a distinctive and uniform color scheme? not just across their sports franchises, but also on signature pieces of city infrastructure. Anyway, one of my theories here is that the geographic setting and the topography are integral to what Pittsburgh is, and I think it's part of why the very notion of toughness is such a fundamental part of the city's identity. And I don't want to give the impression that the city hasn't been damaged by misguided urban freeway projects from the middle of the 20th century. Every city has. It's just that in Pittsburgh, so many neighborhoods are relatively intact. Like, you can walk for hours and hours through and between different neighborhoods and not see or hear a freeway anywhere. A good example of this is number 3, Lawrenceville. Like, I find it hard to overstate how great the urban form is here and how unlike it is to what I'm used to in the cities in the western US where I've lived my whole life. You know, when I was researching the city, I discovered that one of Pittsburgh's nicknames is the Paris of Appalachia, and my first reaction was, come on. But then you walk along a corridor like Butler Street and you start thinking, yeah? Well, let's check the metrics on this movie theater just to be sure, and yeah, it's just very, very good. Prevailing home prices in zip code 15201, a little above average for Pittsburgh, but this neighborhood is just amazing. 2, just next door to the south, Bloomfield, definitely has a feel that's distinct from Lawrenceville, but the heart of this district on Liberty Avenue is less than a mile from Butler Street, which we just looked at. Bloomfield has so many things that I love in a neighborhood. Divey bars right alongside nationally renowned restaurants, old school ice cream shops, Italian ice windows, hard left bookstores, dog-friendly pubs, tabletop game shops, which is almost the best kind of third place. They celebrate Andy Warhol and labor organizing. The walk and bike scores on this funky film lab are out of control, as they should be. When I was walking here, I couldn't help mentally comparing it to something like Greenpoint in Brooklyn, except Greenpoint is 1.5 million bucks and the prevailing home value in the Bloomfield zip code. I'm almost ready to pick up and move right now, but I do still have one neighborhood left. And number 1, for me, has to be Southside Flats. And it's not just because it has an outlet of the world's finest restaurant, although that is important. What really gets me excited is chain establishments that just don't exist on the West Coast at all. Like, if you've never been to a Pins mechanical company, it's kind of like Urbanist, Steampunk, Dave & Buster's. And I do mean that as a genuine compliment. I'm totally on board with doing a paid endorsement, so Pins people, get in touch with my people and let's just work something out. Okay, one thing I really enjoyed about this trip was actually walking neighborhoods that I've street viewed for hours in my spare time. Like, I featured this exact apartment in an affordable urbanism video, and it was just kind of surreal to physically stand in front of it. I wouldn't say there's a high residential density here, but there's a lot of cool missing middle. And then you've got the main commercial street, Carson, which has a ton of interesting independent businesses. So there's a mix of national chains, full-service grocery stores, kind of everything you could possibly need in walking distance. And the storefronts and the building stock are almost like poetry. I just love this stuff so much. Would I call it Parisian? Maybe not, but it is just extremely evocative. So let's check the scoring on this coffee place. Spectacular. Would love it even more with better transit frequency, so call your legislators. Oh, and the price for 15203, it's just clinically insane value, but then that kind of goes for Pittsburgh as a whole. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons for your direct support. Also, thanks to the folks at Carnegie Mellon for bringing me out, and for everyone who showed up at the event. Next up, Edmonton, Alberta, I think. Stay tuned. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode probably in 2 weeks, and I'll see you then.